Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are going to have a simple discussion. I had a realization last night that has now left me convinced that Metroid Prime 4 will be a cross-gen title. What that means is that I think that Metroid Prime 4 will come out for Nintendo Switch 1 and Nintendo Switch 2 at the same time. Metroid Prime 4 was announced to be a Switch 1 title in development since 2017. They had to restart it in 2019, and they've been working on it ever since. And so I do think that they will have a solid running version of Metroid Prime 4 on Switch 1, especially after seeing the amazing Metroid Prime Remastered. But I also think they've been putting together a version for Switch 2. I've been divided on this for a while, I've been wanting it, but trying to temper my expectations somewhat here, because maybe instead Metroid Prime 4 comes out as a holiday title this year just for Switch 1, and there is no cross-gen title, but maybe sometime down the road they have some sort of performance patch like they likely will for a variety of games. And while of course I could be wrong on this, I am no longer divided, I am no longer split. I am just going to outright say that I predict and expect that Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a cross-generation title. So why do I now believe this full-heartedly? That's what we're getting into today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So before getting into my realizations here that have left me convinced that this is going to happen, let's talk about all the other reasons why this has been a conversation up to this point. Perhaps the most obvious reason is that Metroid Prime 4 is the last big internally developed Nintendo title for Switch, and we know Switch 2 is around the corner. And so the release for both this game and this console seem to be relatively close, and that has led many people to believe that it makes sense as a cross-gen title for that reason alone. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and make the argument again that Prime 4 should be a launch title for Switch 2. I've done that already. But there does seem to be a similarity with other Nintendo launch titles. Twilight Princess was a cross-gen title that was a launch title for the Nintendo Wii, and also Breath of the Wild was a cross-gen title that was a launch title for the Switch. And these games were big internally developed Nintendo games. They were the last of their eras, just like Prime 4, and they were big expensive projects that took years to finish. And so they maximized their potential success for both Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild by putting them on two different consoles. For the people that were not ready to move on to the next generation, but still were longly anticipating these games, they picked them up on the GameCube and the Wii respectively. But for those that wanted to play the most modern version with all the updates of the new console, they had that option too. And both times, these games went on to become the best-selling for the series. They're both Zelda games, so yes, Breath of the Wild has passed Twilight Princess, but for the time when Twilight Princess came out, it was the best-selling Zelda game until the arrival of Breath of the Wild as a cross-gen title for Wii U and Nintendo Switch. So Metroid Prime 4, a game that had to see a restart of development, switch over to a different team, where Retro Studios has been hiring all kinds of AAA Western talent over these years, for a variety of years, let me stress that. In other words, this game has been expensive to make, and from that perspective, you would think they would want to maximize sales potential here, and perhaps put it on both consoles. That is the basic argument for why Metroid Prime 4 makes sense as a cross-gen title for Switch 2. But many will counter this thinking by saying that it's not really fair to compare Metroid to Zelda. Zelda is a much bigger franchise, much bigger sales potential, and that very well may be the case. But we're also not talking about Prime 4 being a launch title specifically in this video, just being a cross-gen title. It could come out a few months later into the Switch 2 era. It doesn't have to be the day one title. And perhaps you can make the argument that it makes even more sense for that reason that they want to maximize here and have this game available for both consoles. Because Metroid's not as big as Zelda, it's not as likely to do as well on one console, but for two, they could do really well, especially if Prime 4 is enhanced for Switch 2 and is showcasing the improved abilities of the console, be it new control options or just greatly enhanced performance and visuals. So because of the Switch 2, people may want to give Metroid Prime 4 a try, opening up the series to a larger audience. But then, some would counter by saying that whatever cross-gen version we get of Metroid Prime 4, it's not likely to be such a dramatic improvement that it truly showcases the significant enhancements of the Switch 2, and thus it wouldn't really make that much sense to do it. When we saw the cross-gen titles for Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, there were very different reasons why we saw those versions, and neither of those versions were greatly enhanced from a visual perspective. There were enhancements, but they weren't extremely significant. The most significant change for Twilight Princess were the controls, which made sense because the most significant change for the Nintendo Wii over the GameCube were the controls, not the horsepower. And then in the case of Nintendo Switch over Wii U, again, the Switch isn't a lot more powerful than the Wii U, but it does offer a completely different form factor where it's a hybrid console, and so you can take games both portably or play them at home. And that was the big difference of playing Breath of the Wild on the Switch versus the Wii U. But in the case of something like Metroid Prime 4, from what we understand of Switch 2, it's going to be a dramatic improvement from a horsepower perspective. And Nintendo has yet to divulge all the details about Switch 2, we don't know that much officially yet, and so it's hard to gauge what they might want to showcase on Switch 2, and how that might benefit Metroid Prime 4. But there are some ideas that I think are worth noting. There are patents and also some speculation that perhaps the Switch 2 controller could employ some new technologies that we've seen in things in, say, for example, like the PS5 controller, where they have improved haptics and rumble and resistive feedback, and that could offer some unique little differences we could see in a Prime 4 version for Switch 2. But another idea that's been discussed is perhaps shoulder buttons that also function as a scroll wheel, and this could benefit a variety of games, including Metroid Prime. Imagine using the R button to scroll around to change your beams, or the L button to scroll around to change your visors. You can still click and press things, but you also can scroll left and right to go through selection wheels on the fly very quickly and intuitively. Those would be some nice subtle improvements. But again, the biggest difference from what we are anticipating for Switch 2 is the boost in horsepower. From everything we've heard about DLSS, the idea would be that this technology would facilitate better resolution, better performance, even include ray tracing, the simulation of real-world lighting effects, which can definitely improve the overall look of a variety of games. And that could be something that could help the Switch 2 version of Prime 4 stand out a lot compared to its Switch 1 counterpart. But we've also heard of the system having seamless loading, like there was supposedly a Gamescom demo of Breath of the Wild running at 4K 60, and there were 0 loading times. So if they can get a really good looking running version of Metroid Prime 4, let's say in its dynamic resolution, like it was a Prime Remastered, still at 60 FPS, on Switch 1 and it looks fine, but then they can take that game, have it running at a much sharper resolution. Doesn't even have to be 4K, maybe it's 1440p with bigger draw distances, amazing ray tracing effects, perhaps better texture quality, and next to no loading times where when you shoot a beam door it just opens instantly, or if there is fast traveling introduced, it just happens instantly, and there isn't like a 1 or 2 minute loading screen. That can greatly improve immersion. But oftentimes when we see cross-gen titles, say like from PS4 to PS5, the differences don't seem so vast. And if the idea of Metroid Prime 4 being cross-gen is that it's meant to showcase Switch 2, then perhaps it wouldn't do that great of a job of showcasing Switch 2, even if it does have some of the enhancements we've discussed. Unless they spent a great deal of time really building up a Switch 2 version. And that's something that's hard to gauge. Retro Studios may have only been working on a Switch 1 version this entire time, and so perhaps they haven't had enough time to put together a significantly better looking and running version for Switch 2. But something that I think is worth noting, as I tend to bring up a lot when it comes to these Metroid Prime 4 discussions, is that we have seen evidence that they've been game testing the game since March of last year. And if the game's not coming out this year, that means it's been in the polishing stages for a very long time. And it's not like Retro Studios, an internal team of Nintendo wouldn't be made privy to what's coming next because they are literally a part of Nintendo. So they would likely learn before most third parties. And if third parties are going to have games ready in the first year of Switch 2, why wouldn't a Nintendo studio be able to do it if they weren't too distracted? And of course, maybe they have been too distracted just focusing on the Switch 1 version of Metroid Prime 4. But this is where I get to my recent realizations. A few weeks ago, Dr. 81 found an interesting job listing where they were hiring for an engineer at Retro Studios, and there they talked about how Retro Studios has this focus on the cutting edge when it comes to Nintendo. They are always trying to maximize Nintendo hardware. You look at the history of all their game releases for Nintendo, they are some of the most impressive games we've ever seen on a Nintendo console. Metroid Primes 1, 2, 3, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. They are technical achievements. Even the recent Metroid Prime Remastered is just an incredibly impressive game. I've actually started playing Alien Isolation recently on Switch, and it's apparently one of the most impressive Switch ports there are, and it's a very advanced game, and it's very cool, love it, it is impressive. But I've also been replaying Metroid Prime for like the 17th time. And to me, it's blatant how much better and impressive Prime Remastered is over even something like that, or really pretty much any game on Switch. There's a couple other games you can put in the conversation for different reasons, but the point is that Retro makes shockingly impressive games for the hardware. And my realization is that Retro Studios, the kind of talent they have there, the kind of attitudes they have there, if they had the opportunity to maximize on this project they've been working on for over half a decade, they would take it. And from one perspective, that does mean, okay, yeah, we've put so much resources into this, let's give ourselves the best opportunity here and put this both on Switch 1 and Switch 2. But it also means, if we have the time and opportunity to get a Switch 2 version, we're going to take advantage of the abilities of that console. And they're going to be excited about that. It's not just, oh, we have to do it. No, they're going to jump at the opportunity to see what they can do on Nintendo Switch 2. And if they don't do this with Metroid Prime 4 now, then it could be a very long time before we see their next project made for that new console. And to close out here, I would like to point out something I retweeted a month ago. This is when we got the confirmation of Nintendo's next console from Nintendo. They actually confirmed the existence of the Switch 2, and they'll be giving us more details later on in the fiscal year. Zoid Kirsch, a member of the original Metroid Prime project for Nintendo GameCube, said this in response to that news. I'm guessing Prime 4 is probably going to be a headline launch title for Switch 2, or whatever they are calling the next console. Can't wait to see what my former co-workers are cooking up. So Zoid Kirsch is not with the current Retro Studios, so this isn't him confirming anything, he's just saying what he thinks. But what he thinks is that Prime 4 is probably going to be a headline launch title for Switch 2. Again, the point of this video isn't about Prime 4 being a launch title, but more so just being a cross-gen title whenever they do decide to release the game. And I think it highlights my point. Zoid used to work at Retro. He understands the perspective at Retro and what they would want to do. And I don't think Nintendo or Retro are feeling rushed with Metroid Prime 4. They've absolutely been taking their time. And I don't necessarily think they need Metroid Prime 4 to be a holiday title for Switch 1 this year. We've been talking about other possibilities that would likely be bigger sellers, like a 2D Zelda for example, or Mario Party. And we still need to get those remasters for Metroid Prime 2 and 3. So those could be excellent holdovers until we get Prime 4 sometime next year as a cross-gen title. But that's why I'm convinced that Prime 4 is a cross-gen title. I could still be wrong, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.